Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, your retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video, we're going to look at the second, third, and fourth book of John Flanagan's The Ranger's Apprentice series. If you have not seen my first review of the first book, please check that out. Otherwise, this won't make much sense. So the reason I'm covering these three at once is they tell a cohesive story. The first book, Burning Bridge, and the second book, Icebound Land, end in a cliffhanger. And they conclude with the Battle of the Skandians, which is book 4. So what this story tells of is Will goes off with Gillian and his battle school friend Horace to ask for help from the Celtica, which is the country to the south. So they go there, they find that their garrison at the border has been abandoned, the nearest town has been abandoned rather quickly. They interact with bandits who basically tell them everybody's fled. They've been hearing that there's stuff to steal here and that they've been chased off by Morgarath and the Wargles, and they are now hiding in the south. Why basically Morgarath prepares battle. So Gillian, and then they interact with a young woman by the name of, or at least going by the name of Evanlyn, who basically sees them and is happy to see rangers. That's very specific. And she's essentially claims that her party was attacked by Wargles and her mistress was killed. Now, Gillian figures out pretty quickly, because she's happy to find rangers, and most ladies' maids would be terrified of them, that she is noble. And he's correct. This is Princess Cassandra, King Duncan's daughter. She's the heir to the throne. So that's who she is. She goes by Evelyn quite a bit throughout this book series. She is a major character as the book series goes on. I don't think she's actually ever not in a book from here on out. So Gillian goes off to tell Duncan that Celtica is not going to be able to help them. Will, Horace, and Evelyn are supposed to follow at a slower pace, because they have Ellen and Horace, and the rangers can normally go faster. But then they see Wargles with slaves and want to figure out what the heck is going on. Will originally plans to go himself, but Horace is like, yeah, no, we're going with you. So they figure out, and they find a miner who's kind of escaped, but he's dying. He's laying out in the sun. He's trying to get home. And he tells them that for the last year or so, they've been kidnapping miners, 1 or 2 at a time. And nobody's fully noticed, just because there's a couple miners missing in various different places, and digging this tunnel in order to ambush King Duncan from behind. And that they've come together with Skandians, which are the Vikings in the story. Yes, they're Viking stand-ins. So that's the Skandians. They're important. They come into part later. In fact, the leader of the Skandians' son has decided to partake in this battle, which is kind of unusual, because normally they're Viking-like. They're normally raiders, so this wouldn't be their thing normally. But he's being promised wealth and all sorts of things, so that's what he wants. That's why the son of the current leader of the Skandians is involved in this, along with his own people. So they figure this out, and they're building this tunnel, and they're going to cross this bridge in order to ambush from behind. So Horace goes off to warn the king and get reinforcements, while Will and Evelyn try to destroy the bridge and try to destroy their chances of ambushing. And there's a giant battle. Will and Evelyn are able, I think they do some sort of charges and set the bridge on fire and destroy it. In the meantime, a lot of people are killed. There is a battle, and Morgarath is completely defeated. The prince, or essentially, I don't know exactly what they call him, the son of the Skandians is killed. And then Evelyn and Will are kidnapped and taken into slavery by the Skandians. And that is how this story ends. Now, there is a minor side story, because after they leave, Holt becomes cranky, and the head of the diplomatic corps, Lady Pauline, and Baron Arnold, send him off on a diplomatic mission with Alis, who is Horace and Will's ward mate, who is now junior part of the diplomatic corps. And that essentially ends with basically Holt throwing a stuck-up noble into a moat because he's a dick and he doesn't want to send his soldiers into battle, and he's claiming he doesn't, and then he treats Alis like crap and again gets thrown into a moat. That is the only light part of this book. So it ends with Will and Evanlyn being taken away by the Skandians, and Holt promising Will on the beach that he's going to come after him and he's going to rescue him. And that's how this book ends. So then you moved into the next book, which is Icebound Land. And you have two stories going on here. You have Will and Evanlyn, who are in Skandia. They have been enslaved. Will is eventually hooked on the drug wormwood, which is what they do with all the slaves to keep them docile. And Evanlyn eventually goes through this, gets the help of the man who actually kind of kidnapped him, Eric. He was in charge of the fleet. He kind of likes them, and he realizes they're probably not the greatest of slaves, and he likes her. And he also thought that Will's a very good shot and very intelligent, and he's worthless being hooked on drugs and being used as a slave. So he actually helps Evanlyn get Will out, and they escape, and he directs them to some sort of cabin, and they spend the winter trying to essentially get him off drugs and survive. And that's kind of the story that's going on with these two. The second story that's going on is Holt is not being allowed to go after Will, and he's getting pissed off. He's being sent off, some lieutenant of the warlord who's terrorizing people. And eventually he intentionally insults the king and gets himself kicked out of the ranger courts and the country. And then Sir Rodney, who's the head of the battle school of Redmount, sends Horace to go with him. So they're very much aware that this is why Holt does this, that he gets himself kicked out and banished for a reason. Not that Duncan really wants to do this. This man is his friend. But it's almost assumed that they're trying to follow the rules, and they're kind of trapped by not being able to send him into another country, even to rescue his own people. So they send him off to find Will, and then Rodney sends Horace to go with him, and basically said, "You need a good sword. Go away." And Gillian tries to come, but Holt says, "No, stay here. Take care of this stuff. We will be back." And so you have the journey of Horace and Holt off, basically trying to get to Skandia and battling various knights who frequently go after Horace and challenge him. He's going by the name of the Oak Leaf Knight, which is the oak leaf is the symbol of the Rangers, which most people outside the country do not know this. And they're figuring a few things out. They're dealing with another... I can totally pull up the name of these people here. The bad guys. Let's see. And I'm not going to be able to pronounce these guys. The Temujai. I have no idea. They're nasty people. They want to attack Skandia. They're apparently, and I did not realize this, they're based off Genghis Khan's Mongol armies. So that's their inspiration. So they're the Mongol stand-in. So Holt interacts with them. Now, Holt has interacted with them before he stole horse stock from them. That's where the Rangers' ponies came from many years ago. So, and he realizes they're going after the Skandians because they want their ships. And they want to be able to course the seas in order to attack Arloon. Because, again, they're going after land and resources. So they figure that out. And that's what goes on in this book. I believe it ends with Holt and Horace being captured. I know eventually they escape. But that's kind of how it ends. Will is still stuck on drugs. Him and Evanlyn are kind of in hiding here. and trying to get out the winter. And then Holt and Horace are captured and realizing that there's going to be a problem for Skandia. So that's the end of this book. The last book in this grouping is The War of Scandium. So this is book 4. So in this book, Will gets unhooked to drugs. Evanlyn gets captured. He has to rescue her. In the course of this, Will and Horace and Holt have gotten loose, and the 4 of them reunite. And then Eric shows up. And Holt has to explain to him, these army is coming after you because they want your ships and they're just going to conquer you. And they're good on open land. They have a huge, I think, Mongol armies. They're absolutely other gigantic. They're similar in tactics to the Romans in the fact that they work good on open battlefields. They have a huge cavalry. They're very smart. So they have a tendency to lure other armies into open land and open battle, where they can essentially attack them. And a lot of times they'll circle around and attack them from behind, essentially luring them. And Holt explains, like, they'll lure you out further into the battlefield and then end up encircling you and destroying your army. So that's their tactics. So they have to go back to the leader of Skandia and try to explain this to them. And Holt has to convince him, these are your options. You can run and kind of get yourself on the coast where you can really attack them and give everything up. Or you can do a little bit of attacking their giant train on the side, do a little bit of terrorizing them, guerrilla warfare, and then draw them in and basically fight them on your terms. So there's a lot of battle tactics in here. The other thing that happens in the course of this book is Evanlyn, she's suspicious of one of the Skandians and she sneaks aboard their ship, and she overhears, basically he goes off before she can get off the ship, and he meets up with some of this army with plans to take some of the army up on his, I think he has like 3 or 4 ships, and then bring them and attack his own people from behind. So he's intending to help with an ambush. So, because obviously they're promising money, wealth, and who knows what, probably lying. And so Evanlyn gets back. She tells Holt. Holt tells Eric. It is eventually relieved that she's Princess Cassandra, which irritates the leader because he swore to kill all members of King Duncan's family because his son was killed in the previous battle. But they put that on hold. Eric's like, we have bigger problems. Let's deal with this guy. This guy, of course, eventually denies it. And they say, it's like, let's take his ships and claim that he's busy, he's got held up, and see what happens. And Evanlyn, of course, was right. And they choose to board all these guys onto their ships and then take them through some very, very rough seas, through some narrow islands, and then drop them off on an island in the middle of nowhere because they just want to get off. They're landmen. They're not sea people. They get seasick. So essentially they make them terrorized and seasick and just want to get off. And that's what they do. They drop them off on an island and then proceed to leave them there. It's like, okay, your reinforcements are now abandoned somewhere. We're going to deal with that later. And they come back. This guy gets a heck of a lot of trouble. I don't know if he's banished or they just kill him. But he's gotten rid of. And that part of the army is, again, deserted. And the Skandians win. And the leader, unfortunately, is killed. And Eric is elected the leader. So that is how the story ends. And of course, the Holt and Horace and Evanlyn and Will go home. Though they do create a treaty with Eric. Because one of the ways to defeat this army, because they chased them off, they didn't fully defeat them. Basically, they convinced them to go away by basically saying, it's like, yeah, this is not a good time to attack us because we know your battle tactics and we're going to fight back. So go away. And so that's what they do. Eventually they retreat and they go back to terrorizing other places. So, and they're basically, Holt says they may not be done. And so one of the main ways to attack these guys is with archery. And that's kind of something they showed. So they create a treaty. As long as the Skandians aren't doing combined and orchestrated raids. The Arloons will lend them about basically archers in order to help protect them, because they can't, it takes years to become a very good archer, so they don't have the time, and they're raiders, so they don't have the time to have the people to train to do this. So, and of course the other part of the treaty is, if they ever go to battle, the two countries ever go to battle, the archers have basically the ability to go home. They have free passage to go home. And the Skandians can still do their kind of little individual raids. And mostly they don't. They focus on Celtica and the Skadi in the north, and the Celtic in the south, and other countries. Because Eric just, it's like, I'm going to give up one country. You know what? Or we can raid other places. So, and he doesn't actually officially ban them. They just kind of don't do it. And that's kind of that's the end of this story. Eric is in charge. Holt and Holt, Will, and Cassandra and Horace go home, and Evelyn goes back to being Cassandra. And yes, it gets confusing. She continues to go by Evelyn at various different times throughout this book. They appoint Horace as a full knight, and he becomes part of the King's Guard and is now stationed as a full knight to practically guard Cassandra. Now she can't do the same for Will, because the Rangers are separate and they have their own rules. So she tries to have her father, and he agrees to offer Will a chance to go essentially into the King's spies, and Will refuses and chooses to complete his training as a Ranger, and she doesn't understand this. They've been very, very close. No, they're not in love. But they've been through a lot together. She's saved his life. He's saved hers multiple times. So they've become very, very close. But Horace kind of explains, it's like, he's a Ranger. They're weird. And prior to this, Will hadn't been able to get close to her, because now she was no longer Evelyn. She was Princess Cassandra, dressed in fine clothes, always surrounded by people, so he could never really get her alone. And so he just kind of felt alienated from her. And so he's like, I'm going to go back and fulfill the oath and stay a Ranger and go back with Holt. And so that's essentially the end of this story. And that's how this ends these 3 books. You have the Burning Bridge, the Icebound Land, and then the Battle of Skandia. Now, this is also where Will gets, and they mention this later, Will doesn't have a last name because he is an orphan, and his father was essentially unknown to everybody but Holt. No, I think Holt gave him a last name. He chooses the last name of Treaty. So he becomes Will Treaty, because he was the one who orchestrated this actual treaty. So that is the end of this review. If you like what you see, I will finish off the rest of this book series. I have a bunch of more books that I cover, children's books, films, sprinkling of educational resources, and travel reviews. So be sure to check out my channel, like and subscribe. I have a lot more planned. Thank you.